Hi, this is Dan Matson. Please note that this podcast was created several years ago. Some of the links, email addresses, phone numbers, and promos are outdated and no longer valid. If you want to contact me, my email address is woodenboatdan@gmail.com. Once again, that's woodenboatdan@gmail.com. Thanks and enjoy the podcast. Welcome to Hooked on Wooden Boats weekly podcast episode number 6. I am your host, Dan Matson, and this is the world's first podcast fully dedicated to the art, craft, history, and tradition of wooden boats. Welcome back, folks. This is episode 6, and it's good to have you listening into this. We're hoping the show grows and becomes a community of people that like to mess around on wooden boats. In today's episode, we have a voicemail question from a good friend of mine, Dennis Mulvik. And then our feature is an interview with David Roberts of Nexus Marine Corporation. So we've got lots of stuff going on today. Thanks for tuning in to listen. A couple of housekeeping items. You can subscribe to this show on iTunes, or you can go to the Zune or BlackBerry directories to subscribe. You can also go directly to the website, hookedonwoodenboats.com, to listen to the podcast. Let's see, what else here? Wanted to take care of a couple housekeeping items. You can connect with us on Twitter at twitter.com/woodenboatdan if you'd like to follow us there. And you can also connect on Facebook at facebook.com/woodenboatdan. And you can like us there. One other reminder is that this podcast is weekly. We do plan on releasing it by the end of the day, Thursday each week, so that on Friday morning on your way to work, your way to the gym, or your way to go rowing your wooden boat, you can listen to the podcast and enjoy it. A couple other items here. I'm pretty excited because I signed up to be a volunteer at the Center for Wooden Boats. And they have a facility in Seattle, Washington, and on Camano Island at Kama Beach in the state of Washington. And I actually live a lot closer to Kama Beach, so I'm hoping after I go through the orientation, which will happen next month, that I'll be able to volunteer at the Center for Wooden Boats at Kama Beach. They've got about 15 to 20 wooden boats there that you can row or sail, and they've got some power boats also. And they also do classes and fun events there. So I'm really looking forward to that, getting more involved with the wooden boat community. And what I'm finding as I dig into this a little more each week and meet new people, it opens up new doors, and I find more people and more shops that are into wooden boats, which is pretty cool because you don't necessarily hear a lot about wooden boats on the news or whatever. In fact, I don't think you hear anything on the news, come to think of it, except maybe they'll make an announcement for a wooden boat festival or that sort of thing. But anyway, there is a community of people out there that love the tradition of wooden boats, and I'm one of those guys, and I'm having fun with this podcast. Hopefully you're enjoying it. So let's play the listener feedback here. I've got a question from Dennis Mulvik. Dennis is a good friend of mine. And he calls me Mr. Matson on this voicemail feedback, and that's kind of interesting because he's never called that to my face. But sometimes folks, they go on a recording, and they're a little more formal. So let's go ahead and play Dennis's question here. Go ahead, Dennis, take it away.
Yes, Mr. Matson. My name's Dennis, and I got a question for you. I was curious about what sort of time requirements are there as far as assembling these kits for these wood boats, like a canoe or a small rowboat and so forth? How many hours does it take to assemble one of these? Thanks for your response. Bye now.
Thanks for that question, Dennis. So what I did is I went to one of the kit builders' websites, a company called CLC Boats, and their website is clcboats.com. They're one of the bigger kit boat companies out there that sell a complete kit so you can build a wooden boat from the ground up, and all the parts are pre-cut. The epoxy is included, the fiberglass, the resin, everything you need to build a boat basically except for the paint and varnish. And I went to their website to see what they say about how long it'll take to build a boat, and here's what they say. Most kayak kits take about 45 hours to assemble, not including the painting or varnishing time. We've gotten feedback on thousands of kits, and the average for kayaks from start to finish is about 80 hours of hands-on time. Our sailing and rowing craft have interiors to finish and take a little bit longer, about 100 to 120 hours for boats like the Northeaster Dory, the Scary, or the Chester Yawl. So there you go, Dennis, between 80 and 120 hours. So if you were able to work on it, let's say 8 hours every weekend, you'd be looking at about 10 weekends minimum to do a boat, between 10 and 12 weekends. So it doesn't really take that long, and they've got good instruction manuals with the kits, and it's a lot of fun. It'd be a great project to do with your son or with a friend or with your wife or somebody else. So, and then from there, if you really get customized, of course, you can spend more time on it. When I built a 16.5-foot kayak from CLC Boats, I probably put 150 to 200 hours in because I had a real customized finish with about 6 coat of varnish. And I did some concealed, deck, what do you call those things? Oh, I'm going to pause till I think of this. Just a minute. Yeah, they're deck hatches. You can open the hatch, and then you've got a storage area inside the boat, keep things dry and out of the rain and so on. So I did concealed straps on those, which actually are hooked from underneath, and did a few things like that, and so that took me some extra time. But anyway, that's the scoop, Dennis, and the kits are a lot of fun. It's a great way to get started in wooden boats, so I would recommend it, definitely. So today we have an interview with David Roberts of Nexus Marine Corporation, and David and his wife Nancy started this wooden boat company in the 70s, and they're going to tell us their story on this interview. It's actually David speaking about 98% of the time. Nancy came in the room one time. She had been out shopping, so she came in and said a few words, but most of it's with David. And I first met David in the late 90s through a mutual friend and got a tour of his shop, and then I remember reading about Nexus Marine Corporation in Wooden Boat magazine, probably also in the late 90s when one of his boats was featured on the cover. I believe it was the Tyee boat. David builds boats anywhere from 16 feet, I believe, is the smallest, up to 34 feet. Luxury yachts, beautiful boats, all wood construction. And so let's get started with the interview here. So we're going to go now and take it away, David. Actually, before we start that interview, I wanted to mention that on next week's show, we have an interview with Jay Smith, and his company is Aspoya Boats, and he's building a 56-foot Viking ship in his backyard. Fascinating interview with Jay, and I'd really encourage you to listen in on that for next week. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and start the interview with David Roberts. Take it away. So I'm sitting here with David Roberts from Nexus Marine. It is October.
Nexus Marine Corporation.
Nexus Marine Corporation.
Yeah,
okay.
We got to use the full thing.
Got to use the right name.
Yeah.
Okay. It's October 18th, 2011. And so, David, you've been here since 1975.
Yeah, that's true.
In this building. And everybody's got a story, is what I'm finding out, about how they got into boating and especially into wooden boats. And I would love to hear your story today.
Oh, how I got started into wooden boats. Well,
yeah,
it's it's probably a longer story than anyone really wants to hear, but it started off when I was in the Army in Germany, and I took a European out, and a group of us rented an apartment in the little village that we lived in while we were in the Army over there, and one of the fellows had a book about 5-tonners in Britain, and what they were, small sailboats that you could sail coastally across the channel, that kind of thing. And I read that little book, and I was just fascinated by the whole thing. And then I just kind of put it out of my mind, came back to the States, was working in a cabinet shop, thought I might like to do cabinet making. I'd had a couple of years of engineering school. I went to Cornell for a couple of years, but I heard Pete Seeger's song "Little Boxes," and that put me off engineering. Those of who might remember that song might be able to figure out why that was. But anyway, I went in the Army and came back here and thought cabinet making would be a good use of my skills, because I like to plan things out, and then I like to do the things that I plan out. So I applied to Seattle Central Community College, to their cabinet making program. It was an open enrollment program. The enrollment program for cabinet making was full at the time, but they said, "Oh, you just go in there and we'll put you in boat building school. Just go in there and you can transfer to cabinet making once you get in." So I went in, and my first lecture on my first day was by Earl Wakefield, who founded Admiral Marine. Absolute genius little elf man.
Admiral Marine in Seattle? Or where was that?
Well, they were in Port Townsend, and then they moved to Port Angeles for a while before they had financial problems and went away. His son's still around working.
Okay.
Mega yacht industry. But anyway, I heard his first lecture that first day, and I was a goner.
Really?
Yeah, I thought, this is it. This is what I've been looking for all my life.
So tell me about that lecture.
And I just fell into it, you know.
Tell me about that lecture. What do you remember from that?
Well, it was a philosophical lecture, sort of. He was trying to tell us what boats were, and specifically what wooden boats were, because he was a wooden boat guy. He'd worked back in the early days of the wooden boat industry in Washington, and remembered building big stuff for the war effort, and then got into fishing boats and seiners and that kind of stuff. But anyway, so he was just kind of sketching out what it was all about, and what a batten was, and how you bent a batten to define the curves of a boat, and how water naturally followed the curves of the batten you laid down, and you could sight the batten with your eye and see if it was fair or not, and what fair meant, and what fair meant to the water, and all these sorts of things. And I was just flabbergasted. It never occurred to me that such things could exist as this wood, water, wind, environment thing, and how it all was organic and it played together, and you could think about it, and you could write mathematical equations about it, and there was it was an endless depth of investigation and work. There were essentially no limits to this. I could do anything I wanted with it, and never reached the end of the depths of it. It was fascinating. Mm-hmm. And it was something that it was complicated enough to engage your head, and yet it was simple enough that you understood that with simple tools you could build something that had all these qualities to it, that had its origins, way back when, and yet would work in the uses of the modern world, and so forth and so on. It was just fascinating. So that was basically what he told me, and so I was stuck. So I went to what they call wooden boat school. It was Seattle Central Community College was Gompers Branch back then. Now they call it something else, but it's still in operation. It's still, people still go there.
Mm-hmm. What year did you go there?
I went there under the GI Bill, and I was there in 71, 72, I think, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then after I got my certificate, a friend of mine and I rented a space up in Mukilteo. We were going to have our little boat shop. And so we kind of fooled around trying to start a boat repair or building or something business, just trying to see if there was something we could do other than going to work in the yards, because you could always go to work in the yards. But going to work in the yards wasn't really what I wanted to do. I didn't really want to become a shipwright. I really wanted to be a boat builder.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always been sort of an independent cuss. So I wanted to have my own life and do what I wanted to do and be my own boss. I'm a lousy employee. I'm a terrible employee. I'm 2 weeks in a job and I'm bored,
Mm-hmm.
And from then on, I just become more and more useless. So I needed something that would hold my attention.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Interesting. So what happened after that then?
Well, while we were still there, we finished our first small sailboat that I'd started in boat school, Teach, which is still around someplace, a little 15-foot Bill Atkin design. But anyway, Cecil Lang was up here in the shop that we're in now, and he was building what was called then African Stars, after the African Star, which is another Bill Atkin design, 36-foot transom stern ocean-going cutter. And here's my wife Nancy. Hi, Nancy.
Hello.
This is Dan.
Hey,
Hi.
Nancy, nice to meet you.
We're on the tape
How's it
here.
going? Yeah, we're doing a little interview, so it's okay. Everything's cool.
You can say hi.
Hi.
What Cecil had figured to do was to build them in fiberglass, and this was back in the day when, it's always back in the day, isn't it?
Yeah. Back in the day.
This was back in the day when working class people had incomes, had money, had disposable income. In fact, it wasn't two people had to both work to support two
Reagan.
kids. That's exactly right. But anyway, people would buy fiberglass hulls and finish them out. It was very popular. And an average electrician working for Boeing could buy a fiberglass hull and fit it out and take off across around the world sailing. So he was building hulls for sale to amateurs to finish them out in wood, and plus he was finishing them out in wood for customers. And so that's what I was employed doing. I was taking the glass hulls and putting wood decks and interiors and that kind of stuff. And so it wasn't exactly what I'd ever wanted to do, but it was pretty close to what I ever wanted to do, because it was really, once if you ignore the glass hull part of it, custom wooden boat building.
Exactly, yeah.
And Cecil was a good boss. He was a great boss. He would say, this is how you make the deck beams. Okay, make me 40. This is how you install a deck beam. Okay, install the rest of the deck beams. This is how you fair a deck beam. Okay, fair all these deck beams.
So he would show you how and then just hand it off and let you do it.
Yeah,
Sweet.
yeah.
That's a way to learn, isn't
That's
it?
the way to learn.
Yeah.
Exactly. And we had the skills that we needed from the boat school. True length and two bevel it to death, as they say. And if you don't know what that means, you got to look it up.
Tell me that again.
True length and two bevel it to death.
Okay, I got to look that up because I don't know what that means.
You're trying to anytime you got a piece of wood that goes in a boat, right? It's always a double-ended foot because the hull is a finite enclosure.
Okay.
So unless you're planking and you're running them off the transom, But anything else, if it's a double-ended hull, even the planking is a double-ended fit. So you got a true length between a corner of the piece of wood and the other corner along the same edge of that piece of wood. So that's the length of it. And then each end of it, and nothing's ever square in a boat, so each end of it's a compound bevel, so it's 2 bevels. Right. So you need the true length of the board plus the 2 bevels that are located at either end of the board.
I see.
And you take that true length and you cut the 2 bevels and the board drops into place. That's the theory anyway.
Okay. All right. I like
well,
that.
You knew that. You just didn't know the words.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
So I did that for a while, and then Cecil started to get busier, and he decided he had his son here. His son, he's a New Zealander, and he had his son come here from New Zealand, son David. And so they were working together, father and son kind of thing, and he had a mind to grow the business and maybe eventually turn it over to David. And so he packed up from here and moved to Port Townsend, and I didn't want to follow him to Port Townsend. I liked it here. And he said, well, why don't you just take over the rental of this place when I go? And so I did. And so then we had this huge boat shop with the ways, the marine ways, to play in. It was really quite a step up for us. We went from this little boat shop in Mukilteo where it was just concrete and asphalt and a relatively small space into this huge space with the ways and the whole bit. Hello. And it's still my partner Martin Adams and I working together as Robertson Adams. And so we did some repair because we had the way, so we hauled some boats out. We did a bunch of repair. We finished out a fiberglass hull, a 38-foot Ingrid built the hull was laid up by Blue Water Boats. That boat's still around. Nice boat. We did a nice job on it. The couple we built it for, Pat and Daphne, the object of the game was to sail around the world in it, of course. I mean, that was the object of the game in those days for everyone, really. And he had been a fisherman in Alaska and done pretty well. He was a good entrepreneur. And he and Pat and Daphne set off to sail around the world, and they made it as far as the Chesapeake before Daphne's doctor said, you've been seasick every day you've been offshore, and you're going to lose your kidneys if you don't quit this.
Oh, my goodness.
So they had...
Every day.
Every day. Every day.
And
every
she
minute
hung
of
in
every
there.
day. Oh, she's a tough woman. She's a tough woman, and a good craftsman. She painted fabulous Ukrainian eggs and helped us lay the teak deck on the boat. Actually, she did most of the work, really. So she was a great woman. Anyway, is a great woman. They're still friends. They're still around. They're in Sun Valley now. But anyway, so they got as far as the Chesapeake, and they shipped the boat back, and that's a lot of... But they didn't get divorced.
Oh.
Most of these stories end in divorce.
Yeah.
Yeah, we built the boat, we moved aboard, a year later. Either the boat's on the beach in Southern California or they're divorced. That's the way that usually goes. It's not an easy transition to go from building the boat to being on the boat. It's another story altogether. But anyway, so we did that, and then we built some more stuff, and we built a small sailboat for a guy up in Alberta, a very nice little boat. And then Pat was this fisherman in Alaska, and Pat Murphy and Daphne Copel are the names, actually, so might as well get that down on the tape too. Give them the credit is due, They fisherman up in Alaska, and he founded a fishery in Bristol Bay where he caught fish on the was called the west side, and he flew them out, and he caught them set netting, which is the nicest, kindest way to catch salmon, and he said, you really ought to do this. So Nancy and I went up to Bristol Bay, and we set netted on the beach for a couple of summers, And mostly what we got out of it was the permit appreciated in price enormously. And we sold the permit for a lot more than we bought it for, which was the only money we ever made out of that business, unlike Pat, who was really better at it than we were. But anyway, that time while we were up there, we fished out of a skiff, a 22-foot planked wood skiff that leaked like crazy and was so flexible we called it the string bean. But the 6 inches of water in the bottom just kind of kept the fish wet. So it wasn't that big an objection, really. But we decided that, heck, we could build better boats than this. So we came back from Alaska and started building wooden skiffs. And at first we marketed them to canneries, because in those days canneries loaned the money to the fishermen, and the fishermen bought the skiff that the cannery said to buy, basically. And the cannery shipped the skiff to Alaska, and the fisherman fished out of the skiff and sold the fish that he caught to the cannery. It was all sort of under contract. It was like serfs.
So
the
they
fishermen were all serfs.
pay for the skiff with the fish they paid back to the cannery?
That's right.
So what were those skiffs? What design and length were those?
I designed them, and they were from 15 to 24 feet long. They were kind of beamy, burdensome, glued plywood. That was the start of our use of epoxy, really. Well, not really the start, I should say. We started on epoxy when we built Moreau, the sailboat for Pat and Daphne. But these are the first boats we built entirely with epoxy. And we didn't epoxy coat them, that wasn't worthwhile. But we epoxy glued everything. I think some of those skiffs are still alive and working up there. But we had this little business where we would take orders and we would build these skiffs. In fact, it says out there on the wall someplace.
Out in the shop? Yeah,
Bill and Dan planked 2 15-footers in one day. And they wrote it on the wall. So that was kind of the closest we ever got to production boat building. We would build quite a few of these things.
So they were V-bottom
No,
plywood?
they were flat bottom.
Oh, flat bottom.
Flat bottom, simple as it could be. Well, the object of the game in beach skiffs is you have to carry as much fish as you possibly can in as little draft as you possibly can. It's sort of an engineering problem until you think about it for about 5 seconds, and then you realize, well, you just built a big flat bottom.
Which is more stable the more weight you put in it also, right?
Well, yeah, that's not that so much. It just doesn't sink as much as you put the fish in it. So you can put a tremendous amount of fish in a beamy, flat-bottom skiff and still have it float in not that much water, because you have to bring the skiff in right against the shore, because that's where the fish are. And it has to have pretty high sides. For one thing, you're going to load it down really deeply, and for another thing, you're always battling the lee shore issue, and so you got waves coming in, and sometimes it's kind of rough. So it was a fun deal. We got a picture of one of our 15s that we built for a hatchery in Southeast, and there's a forklift holding up 3 halibut, and the guy says, and they're big halibut, they're taller than the guys are in the picture, and it was 4 guys went out in one of these 15-foot skiffs and brought in 3 halibut must have been close to 200 pounds apiece, and they had a 4th one, but they decided not to boat it wisely.
Would have been too big, too much weight.
Well, yeah, 4. You have a 15-foot boat, right?
With 600 pounds of halibut.
Yeah, and 4 guys. But this is a commercial 15-foot boat. It's not like your average little 15-footer that you'd see out on a lake or something. So anyway, so that was another one. We built a 24-footer. The guy had 10,000 pounds of reds in it.
Wow.
So that's what that fishery is all about. But the problem, what happened is that to that business, that invention of ourselves, is that the people in Southeast, or I should say the people in the Alaska fisheries, didn't take that great care of their boats. They left them outside. They left them right side up. No matter how good a boat you gave them, no matter how well you built it, a lot of times they wouldn't see its second season.
Wow. Because
they just let it deteriorate over the wintertime. You got ice in it, it froze, all that kind of stuff. So aluminum is the solution to that. And so they started buying aluminum skiffs instead of wood. And I can understand that from that standpoint, but from the money-making standpoint, I never did figure it out, because you can, for every pound of aluminum you put in a boat, you can't put a pound of fish in. And our boats would weigh a quarter of what an aluminum boat would weigh. So you could put an extra 1,000 pounds of fish in one of our boats compared to an aluminum boat. But
wow. So in those days we were using a marine plywood, not like we get today, probably.
Yeah, for marine.
Okay.
For
and
marine.
What were those 15-footers selling for? Do you remember at the time?
$1,500 maybe, something like that. $2,000. They weren't painted. You know, they were sanded to 80 grit and given a coat of sealer and put out the door.
Okay.
And we could build one of those in about 80 hours, start to finish.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, it does seem amazing now. You know, Phil Bolger, in one of his stories about one of the lobster boat builders in down east, said that the builder said that they used to build a boat every, I don't know how many days it was, and he says, and I can remember doing it, he said, but I just don't remember how. How it was possible, meaning.
Yeah, right. So what happened after the skiff days?
Well, what happened is we put up posters around town, down Fisherman's Terminal and stuff like that, trying to interest people besides the canneries in buying skiffs. And what happened is that no commercial people were interested, but recreational people were interested. And so we started building sort of the same thing, but slimmed up, fined up, cleaned up, prettied up for recreational fishermen.
And you were building those here in Everett?
Yeah, right here in the shop.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And people would come to the shop then, and we would talk, and they would order a boat, and we would build it. And that's kind of the business that we've done to this day.
I see. Interesting.
Yeah.
So what year did you start doing that?
Oh, what year would that have been? Well, we left Bristol Bay. Our last season at Bristol Bay was 80. And so we built skiffs for probably 2 years after that. So this probably would have been 83, 84, we started building dories for recreational fishermen on Puget Sound.
Oh.
About then.
Now, were these dories you designed, or?
Well, no. We started out with what's called a Carolina dory, which was a plan that was sold by Captain Jim Orrell of Texas Dory Boat Plans. Those who've been perusing the classified ads in the back of boating magazines for a couple of decades will have come across Captain Jim Orrell and Texas Dory Boat Plans. Mm-hmm. So we built the boats sort of under license from him, where he got, I can't remember, some percentage of what we sold the boat for. We sent off to Captain Jim. But the boats the design really wasn't very good. And it had a lot of problems. And so I started looking into the problems and the solution thereof. And it just started to get really interesting, because you can go down to any library, any bookstore, and you can buy books on sailboat design, and they will tell you basically exactly how to do it. You know, Dell and bow angle, you know, wind pressure coefficients, centers of effort, plane of lateral resistance and the location thereof, and all this kind of stuff. But boy, try to find something about how to design a powerboat. It's not there. And it isn't because nobody knows how. It's because the interest, I think, in that aspect of things just doesn't exist among recreational powerboaters and among amateur powerboaters. You know, the professionals obviously know how it's done, and we're educated in the how it's done by schools of naval architecture. But the amateur guy, the guy just starting out who wants to learn how it's done, really doesn't have a lot of resources. So it took me a while to figure out how that all worked. And I had the assistance of a wonderful naval architect who worked for Boeing, who developed the Boeing hydroplane way back when in this effort. But anyway, I designed a new boat. We called it the Nexus 21-foot dory. We still sell plans for that boat today. We built a bunch of them. Our most popular boat we ever built, I ever designed, to replace the Carolina that we were building under license from Captain Jim.
Now that's a dory with a transom on it, so you can put an outboard motor
transom
on it.
Dory, yeah.
Is it an inboard well?
You can build it either way.
Either way.
We built some with inboard wells. We built some transom hung.
Mm-hmm.
And it basically doesn't have any flaws. Basically, it's a great boat. And I figured it all out.
Because you have an engineering background.
Because I have an engineering background, and I also have an interest in all that kind of stuff, and I understand how the science of materials and all that. I don't have any background in hydrodynamics, but you don't really need hydrodynamics to design a boat. Mm-hmm. You need hydrodynamics to design foils, but libraries of foils are available. I mean, if you want to do foils, you just look them up in the library. It's not that hard. A hydrodynamicist has done the work for you already. And boats are old enough and they go back far enough that this is all not that. Once you understand the principles of it, it's not that hard to do.
Right. So why build boats out of wood, Dave? We have all these modern materials.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of have my own answers to that, and you've got information on your website, which I read, which is interesting, but just give me your take on that.
Well, I was interested to start with in building boats out of wood. As I've already explained, it's sort of the organic thing. But then I was in kind of a different situation because now I'm the owner of a business, and I have to make a living building boats out of wood. And that is a whole nother story. It's easy to build boats, but it's much harder to build boats for a living, and way harder than that to build boats out of wood for a living, because the plastic guys, when I started building boats, the plastic guys had a 10-to-1 advantage in labor hours. 10-to-1. Right? So how are you going to compete against that? That's the essence of the problem for the person who would be professional wooden boat builder is one way you can compete against that is you can just do it for a tenth the money, right? Except the fiberglass guys are paying their laminators $15 an hour. So you're going to do it for $1.50 an hour? I don't think that's going to work either. You can't feed yourself on $1.50 an hour. So you have to have competitive advantage somehow. And the competitive advantage of wooden boats, and it's not an absolute economic competitive advantage. They're still going to be more expensive. There's no way out of that, right? But the competitive advantage of wooden boats is essentially they're stiffer and they're lighter because they're stiffer. They can be lighter because they're stiffer. Wood is stiffer because it's a lower volume material. Plastic is heavy. So you're going to have two boats of equal weight, a wooden boat and a plastic boat. The shell in the plastic boat is going to be a lot thinner than the shell on the wooden boat. And because stiffness goes up as the fourth power, the wooden boat is going to be substantially stiffer or lighter. Or a combination. It can be stiffer and lighter. So it's not that hard to build a wooden boat that weighs half of what a competitive fiberglass boat would weigh, and yet you take the two boats out in a seaway, the wooden boat is quiet. The fiberglass boat, oil cans, it goes whong, 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 or aluminum. Aluminum's got the same problem. With the additional problem, aluminum's got the other problem of corrosion and the other problem of looking like a starved horse if you don't put enough framing in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the modern way, which has been around for probably 30 years or so, is you use this real high-tech marine plywood. A lot of it's a kumi plywood, and you encapsulate it. So tell us about that process. Yeah.
The Goujon brothers figured out that, and this was really a huge advance in wooden boat building. This is the biggest advance in wooden boat building since they abandoned trunnels for metal fastenings, I think, or since L. Francis started using screws instead of nails, was that if you encapsulated wood in epoxy, if you put enough epoxy on all sides of a piece of wood and you put it in a humidity chamber, it didn't change weight. It stayed dry. So if you started out with dry wood and encapsulated it, the wood would stay dry. And that's sort of important from the standpoint of rot prevention, because it does that. But there are a lot of ways you can keep boats from rotting, besides epoxy. But the biggest thing it did was it said you can look up in a table, in a book, research studies that have been done on particular species of wood and their strengths at particular moisture contents. And you can measure the moisture content of the piece of wood you're going to build the boat out of, and you can look up in a table and see what its strength is. And then you can use it as an engineering material, because then you can assign it a strength, and then you can use it as any other engineering material using principles of statics and strength of materials.
Because you've defined its characteristics.
Because you've defined its characteristics, and those characteristics are going to be stable. And then also using epoxy, you can knit the various members of the boat into a single unit, and you can calculate the characteristics of that single unit. So you can, it's possible to calculate the strength of a wooden structure if it's built out of epoxy. If it's encapsulated in epoxy, glued together with epoxy, you can calculate it. And then you can design it to meet the strength requirements that it has to meet. And you can work those out too, so you can work all this stuff out. And so that enables you to build a much, much, much lighter boat.
Interesting. So tell me, have you got one or two most memorable stories about boats you've built for people that were very unique or special, or?
Those sorts of stories aren't so much about the boat as they are about the people.
Yeah.
You can build the identical boat for two different sets of people, and one set of people are going to have a completely different experience with the boat than another set of people. So
tell me about some of the people you've built for.
Well, there's Pat and Daphne. They're probably the most memorable people we ever worked with. They were just fabulous. I should tell a little. No, I won't tell a story on Pat. Let's see. We built this little sailboat, an 18-foot sailboat for these people up in Alberta that was epoxy coated. It was the first thing we'd ever done where it was totally encapsulated in epoxy and glued together with epoxy and all that kind of stuff. Painted with all grip, the whole 9 yards. It was a little 18-foot yacht. And they took it up to Alberta, and it freezes in Alberta, right? And so this is a wooden boat. So this was sort of an experiment almost. He's going to sail this boat in lakes. He's going to put it in his garage in the wintertime. It's going to be 50 degrees below. Any water whatsoever gets into the structure, the paint's going to fall off. It's going to blow apart. Boat's still good. And we built that boat for him in '81. The boat's still perfect.
Wow.
So that's sort of a testament to, and it was a cool little boat too. It was a very cool little boat. But I can't remember who the designer was.
Was it sloop rigged?
Sloop rigged, yeah. Big rig, 200 square feet on a 18-foot boat. The thing would tack downwind in a light breeze. A monohull, right? That would tack downwind.
You make wooden spars for it too, David?
No, we didn't. The wooden spars are really, really cool, but boy, are they expensive to make. And it's hard to bring the technology to bear on a project that size to make it lighter than you could do it in aluminum. Really, really hard. So the inexpensive, the simple, what I recommend to do is rig it with aluminum and stainless. That's a simple thing to do. You can do that in a week. What would take you 2 months to do if you're going to do it traditionally. But so we rigged it with aluminum and Dacron sails and all that kind of stuff Very cool boat.
And that boat's still going strong.
Yeah, the boat's still good.
30 years later.
Yeah. Boat's still fine.
Yeah.
And then that's the most severe conditions you can. It's more severe really than the tropics because of the freezing business.
Yeah.
That's always the problem in Alaska. Is the paint comes off in the wintertime.
Mm-hmm. So what about for you, your personal boats that you've used over the years? Any favorites there?
No. We're boat builders, and we're not boat users, really. For one thing, it costs us the same to build a boat for ourselves as it costs the customer that we build a boat for. It's the same. It's the same money. You can't build a boat for yourself for less than you can build it for someone else.
Yeah, because your time's not free.
Yeah, your time's not free. You lost that income, and that income's a charge, right?
Yeah.
So we really we started out to build us a 33-foot ocean-going sailboat. We were going to sail away too, and we got a good start on it. But we early on in the process we thought, this is going to cost us back way then. This is back in the day, $60,000, in materials to build this thing, plus all the labor that it's hard to come by, and we love the Puget Sound area. We just love being here, and we had several friends who went cruising, went sailing off around the world in South Seas and all that, and we stayed in contact with them and talked to them when they came back or whatever, and it seemed like we had a much more interesting life than they did. Because you're really confined on a boat. I mean, it's the passage making is relatively quick. A couple of weeks and you're in Hawaii, right?
Yeah.
That's 2 weeks. And then what do you do? So then you anchor out and you're seasick in 4-foot swells for 2 months until you decide to spend 2 weeks and go to the next island.
Yeah.
So and who do you meet? You meet the people who are in harbor with you, who are all the same as you are. Right? They're from the same walk of life. They have the same interests.
Yeah, that's true.
Not trying to discourage anybody from building a boat and sailing around the world. I mean, it's a fun thing, but just you got to look at it realistically too.
Yeah.
And plus, you don't stay in good shape. And I love to climb and hike and ride bicycles and do all that kind of shoreside stuff.
I noticed you got a couple road bicycles out
here.
Yeah. You and Nancy go riding some?
Yeah, we have a tandem.
Fun.
Yeah, we ride our tandem year-round.
Wow.
We're going to go out this Sunday and do a 55-mile hilly ride.
Where at?
Probably in the rain.
Where at?
Oh, we're going to ride out of Log Boom Park at the north end of Lake Washington and ride up to Snohomish and back.
Oh, nice.
You ride?
I do. Yeah. I started about 10 years ago.
Yeah. I started when I was 50. I'd ridden road bikes when I was a kid, when I was in my teens. And then I just didn't for a long time, and one day I stumbled on the way to the mailbox when I was 50 years old, and I thought, I stumbled. I don't stumble. I've never stumbled. And the next day I went out and I bought a used road bike.
Nice.
And started riding.
Yeah. I love to bike ride. That's probably one of my favorite passions, along with wooden boats, is riding bikes.
Yeah.
Haven't been on a ride since yesterday. I got to get out today.
All right. Yeah. That's the way to go.
I love it. Maybe we'll see you on the road sometime.
Yeah.
So fun stuff. So how about can you give us your contact information, your website and stuff, David, for our listeners?
Sure. I'm David Roberts. My wife is Nancy Sosno. We're at 3816 Railway Avenue, Everett, Washington 98201, and our website is www.nexusmarine.com. Nexus Marine, all one word.
And your phone number here?
425-252-8330.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate your time today, David. This has been a lot of fun.
It has been, Dan.
David and I actually met about 15 years ago. I had a banker friend that was into wooden boats, and he said, "You got to come down and meet this David Roberts guy. He's building boats down here on the Snohomish River." So that's when I first came down here. So any parting comments you'd like to make, or anything else you want to say to our listeners today?
Have fun. Have fun. That's whatever you do in life. Have fun doing it, and pursue your dreams. Never give up.
Cool. Very good words. I like that. Yeah. It seems like the older I get, the more I'm doing that, is kind of pursuing my dreams, which is doing stuff like this.
And never giving up is a critical part of that.
Yeah.
No retreat, baby, no surrender.
That's right. That's right. Well, thanks a lot, David. Appreciate it. Well, I hope you enjoyed that interview with David. And thanks for doing that, David. Really appreciate it. And getting all that fun information and hearing your story is pretty cool. If you do have questions for David or for me or about wooden boats, please call our listener feedback hotline at 424-261-2360 with any comments or questions. Again, that's 424-261-2360. And this week's question, which we've actually had for the last couple of weeks, I'd love for you to tell us about a wooden boat you have built or owned and why you were crazy about this boat. You can also email me at dan@hookedonwoodenboats.com or leave a comment on the website, which is hookedonwoodenboats.com. Again, that's hookedonwoodenboats.com. You can also leave feedback for us on the iTunes, Zune, or BlackBerry directories. And thanks for tuning in today. Until next week, keep the bright side up and the barnacled side down. This is Wooden Boat Dan, over and out.